Okay, hello there everyone, and welcome to today's University Business webinar. My name is Kurt Isidurley. I'm the web seminar editor here at UB, and I'll be your moderator. The title of our event, as you see here, is Planning for Your Institution's Future Financial Success, Secrets from 6 Higher Ed Leaders, and is being brought to you through the generous support of our sponsor for today, Kaufman Hall. First off, as attendees and members of our audience are still coming in here, a bit of background about our topic and what we'll be taking a look at here today. The third annual edition of Kaufman Hall's Financial Trends Report provides insights on key performance benchmarks, plans, and challenges facing higher education budget and finance professionals in 2020. The report also includes insights from innovative budget and finance officials from the University of Southern California, University of Arizona, and Lane Community College, among others. Today we're going to learn about some strategies from these leading institutions uncovered by the research that can help your institution plan for financial success and sustainability. We're looking forward to an interesting presentation and discussion here, plus live Q&A. We welcome your questions, so do stay tuned. We're going to get started in just a minute or two here. First off, before we do, just some quick housekeeping. First item, as it says here, for technical support. If you need it at any time, you can use the chat panel at the right margin of your screen there. Just make sure it's set to our event host and producer. His name is Jason York. Let him know if you're having any technical issues. He'll be able to help you out there. Also, as it says here, the second item, if you have any trouble listening through your computer speakers, if you prefer to listen privately, we will post the phone number and access code that you can dial to get audio access. We'll post it in the chat panel at the right there. You can dial that at any time if you like. Also, as it says here, third item, as I mentioned earlier, we welcome your questions at any time for our panelists. If you have a question at any time, feel free to type it in the Q&A, the bottom right-hand corner there. Just make sure it's set to all panelists like it says on the slide. We'll get to as many questions as we can during the Q&A at the end of the presentation. So once again, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in at any time in that Q&A bottom right-hand corner. Also, speaking of questions, we are commonly asked about accessing the presentation at a later time, either the slides or the recording. And yes, just so you know, everyone who registered or attended here today will be getting follow-up email with links to where you can access the slides if you want to go back through the content. And we are recording here. This will be archived on the UB site, and you'll see a link to that in that email as well. So if you want to go back over the content or share with anyone on your team at your institution, don't worry about that. You'll have opportunity to do that. Also, one other item, we will be taking a few poll questions here today as part of the presentation. And so you'll see that scattered throughout the presentation. When we get to that point, a poll question panel will launch at the right side of the screen there. And if you would just select your answer and click submit at the bottom, you can participate in the discussion, and thanks in advance for your participation. Okay, so with that, on to our panelists and our program here today. We're very fortunate to have with us two experts from Kaufman Hall. Stuart Clark is Senior Solutions Engineer, and Logan Anderson is Higher Education Practice Lead. We're excited to have them both with us to give us an overview of the findings of their annual report and appreciate their insights. So Stuart is going to start us off here. So I'll hand it over to him. Stuart, it's great to have you. Welcome to today's webinar.
Yeah, thanks, Kurt, and welcome to everyone to the webinar, which again is Planning for Your Institution's Future Financial Success, Secrets from 6 Higher Ed Leaders. We'll start off by taking a moment to introduce ourselves in a little bit more detail. So my name's Stuart Clark, and I'm a Senior Solutions Engineer at Kaufman Hall on our Higher Ed team. So at Kaufman Hall, I'm engaged with our clients and prospects on basically a daily basis, trying to understand their needs and then to design product solutions to address those needs. I've been with the firm for about 4 years, so I've worked with the majority of our 55 higher ed clients at one point or another. And in addition to that experience, I also spent nearly 10 years prior to Kaufman Hall working in a variety of different finance roles. Most recently, I was the controller at the MIT Sloan School. And then prior to that, I worked as a financial analyst in the central finance office at Harvard University. So in those roles, I really gained a firsthand view into the challenges that colleges and universities face and how they can be addressed through better planning and analysis. I'm also joined by my colleague, Logan Anderson. Logan?
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. Logan Anderson here. I'm a practice lead within the higher education vertical at Kaufman Hall. And in my role, I'm really focused on the successful implementation of our software at our clients. So I lead our team of consultants and try to bring wherever I can best practices to bear at the institutions we serve. So I've been in higher education a little over 12 years, 15 years total in terms of my financial background, but most of that was actually at the University of Notre Dame, where I led the university's budgeting process and actually led an EPM implementation at the University of Notre Dame. So whenever I'm working with a client, I'm really trying to sort of recall what those experiences were like going through an implementation. And I also try to bring to bear all those things I learned at that university. But then in my 3+ years here at Kaufman Hall, what I've seen at, I've probably worked with at least 24 of our institutions and trying to sort of bring to bear all the information I've gained from those institutions over the years. So really trying to bring it all together in a solid way to serve our clients. So I'll turn it back over to you, Stuart.
Thanks, Logan. So yeah, now let's jump into the presentation. So here's the agenda that we're going to go through. We'll start off by doing a quick overview of the 2020 Kaufman Hall University Business Financial Trends Survey. And then we'll give you an overview of the expert panelists who provided insights on the survey results, which are highlighted in the presentation. And then from there, we're going to do a deep dive into 4 topic areas that were in the survey, which are listed here. The first is the current state of higher education, then the administrative inefficiencies, actionable data, and organizational structures. So for each one of these sections, we're going to share the survey results, some commentary from the expert panel, and then also some advice to consider as you plan for your institution's future financial success. And again, just to reiterate, we save time for Q&A at the end, but if you have questions, please submit them, and we'll try to address them all, or as many as we can at the end. So slide 5 here provides the demographic breakout of the roughly 100 higher ed institutions who completed the 2020 Kaufman Hall University Business Survey. So this survey is really an effort on an annual basis to understand the current state of higher ed and the key issues that colleges and universities are facing. If you look at the pie graphs here, the survey respondents really represented a diverse cross-section of colleges and universities, and that included both 4-year and 2-year schools, private and public universities, as well as a fairly even distribution with regard to the enrollment size of the universities. And when we analyze the survey data, we had 3 key takeaways from those 100 higher ed institutions. First, we compared the data against survey results in the prior years, and the responses really hadn't shifted significantly. In particular, most of the institutions continued to see challenging financial landscape for higher education, and they hadn't really shown forward momentum against key financial goals. And the survey was focusing on higher ed financial practices and tools. The respondents really continued to feel that they lagged other industries. So then, with that information in mind, we wanted to understand some of the perspectives from an in-depth basis of some higher ed experts. So this year's report in the presentation today includes the insights and advice from a panel of prominent budget and finance experts at both public and private colleges and universities. And you can see the 6 expert panelists here that we talked to, along with their titles and the institutions that they work for. And like the broader survey, the expert panel really represents the whole spectrum of higher ed, both from community colleges to large R1 public and private universities. So as we go through the presentation today, again, we'll talk about some of the specific insights that these experts provided to us. So we'll jump into the survey data, and the first section here is a high-level view of the current state of higher ed finances. Slide 9 addresses the higher ed business model specifically. So we asked the respondents if they believe their institution's current business model would be viable in 5 to 10 years. And you can see that a large percentage, 40% overall, don't believe it will be, which is a pretty scary statistic. And then in the quotes off to the left, you can see some more detailed comments from the folks in the panel around the topic of sustainability. So all three of the panelists' quotes acknowledge that changes to the organization's financial management are going to be required to ensure the sustainability over the long term. And so whether it's rebalancing the use of resources to higher priority investments or diversifying the revenue streams of the university in order to reduce the reliance on the endowment, almost every school is looking to do something to change what their financial picture looks like from one form or another. So then on slide 10, you can see some responses to another survey question, which is where we ask schools what specific actions they're trying to take to address that financial sustainability. The responses here, the respondents were able to choose multiple options, and you can see there were several popular choices. And from my perspective, that makes sense. It's difficult to move the needle if you're just looking at one strategic initiative. So a lot of institutions are taking a really multi-pronged approach to this. Reducing the expenses at the university has been the top goal for several years, and it was slightly lower this year versus last year. So last year, when we looked at the results, it was about 73% versus 67%. And that begs the question of whether some of the schools are feeling a little less pressured on the cost side, so maybe it's less important, or maybe it's that it's just proven really difficult to continue to cut expenses one year after the next. And then finally, when we discussed the question with our expert panel, Kim Bergenser from USC had the quote off to the right-hand side there. She acknowledged that there was a real need to reduce expenses given how challenging it had become to continue to increase tuition. Now, for a lot of schools, that feeling of tuition pressure is probably nothing new, but I think it's especially interesting coming from a school like USC, which has historically had extremely strong demand and been able to have a lot of pricing power, rather. You can also see in Kim's statement about the need to leverage more data to reduce expenses and improve fiscal responsibility. And that's a theme we're going to touch on quite a bit in the presentation today. Then the final polling question, or question in this section, highlights the question of whether institutions feel like they're agile. So we asked people if they were confident in their team's ability to adapt and make adjustments under changing business circumstances. So the results show the vast majority, about 86%, lacked a high level of confidence, and 1 in 5 had no confidence at all. And those results were really similar to the prior years, which showed us that lack of positive momentum that's troubling to us, especially given that there's broad acknowledgement within higher ed that we're facing some significant issues. When we talked to the panelists about this, the consensus was that they were facing a whole wide variety of issues on any given day. They talked about everything from shifting government policies to changes in the amount of federal support that was available, the need to reallocate funds, even managing course capacity and faculty staffing loads. So in many ways, I think when you're facing so many different issues, it's hard to be able to have confidence that you're going to be able to execute on any given one of those. So that is the first section, which again was just a look at higher ed in general and some of those financial problems. And again, as you saw, the general theme was there are significant financial and structural issues. The next sections dig a little bit deeper into some of the underlying symptoms and try to offer up some potential solutions. So I'll turn it over to Logan to talk about administrative inefficiencies.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. I think one of the things that really bore out in the survey this year was that a lot of institutions aren't operating efficiently. And I think, really when I talk to clients, they really want to be able to transition from trying to figure out, what sort of happened in the past and transitioning to, thinking about what's going to happen next. So moving from being kind of transactional in nature as a financial professional to strategic. And, some of the indicators that this is an issue at a lot of the institutions we work with is the budget cycle length. So the length of a university's budget cycle can indicate whether the institution can really perform critical, basic functions in an efficient manner. So long budget cycles, often but not always, can be an indicator that you've got inadequate tools, and that those prolong the institution's budget development, approvals, the ability to sort of dynamically change as the institution changes, leadership changes their minds and board meetings. That becomes more difficult with tools that can't adapt to that. So current processes are often, manual, very labor intensive, so they take a long time to execute on. And, as you can see here in the survey results, especially in the past, what we've seen as we looked at the trends is that these processes are becoming longer, not shorter. So, and I think one of the sort of things that also bore out, and you'll see in the quotes, is that many institutions, are using kind of an incremental budget model as a way to shift unrestricted or allocated resources across the institution. And what they don't have is really a very robust in-year forecasting or reforecasting process that supports projecting the year end and then using that as a base for future budgets. So they're stuck in this model where they're looking at the current year budget that isn't sort of dynamically updated. And when you have a model that's incremental in nature, it becomes very difficult, especially when you're trying to reduce an allocation, to do that because it becomes politically charged. So I think some of the next quotes here from Jim at University of Rochester and Kathy at University of Arizona really kind of bear this out, in that your budget very quickly becomes, outdated. Jim's talking about, they kind of set the budget in November, and by July, you know that that's out of date, and you need to be able to adapt and react. Similar sentiment here from Kathy as well, and that reforecasting and adjusting are absolutely critical. You can't be stuck with that old budget. You've got to be dynamic and be able to transition across these different sort of planning scenarios. The next slide here, and sort of output of the survey, was really, how do leaders within higher education feel they stack up against other industries when it comes to adapting modern financial planning tools? And you can see here it's pretty overwhelming. 76% feel like they're behind most other industries. And really what this leads to is a lag in the key strategic decision-making process at many universities. So many universities are still using Excel, right? And so Excel, will always have a place within higher education, but there are just too many challenges with maintaining a budget model, or a planning model in Excel. So that's data integrity, consolidation, time. This really reduces the institution's ability to be able to flex dynamically. So another factor is also the culture within an institution, within higher education. So, quite often the existing tools, shadow system processes are owned by individuals who are highly invested. They've been at the institution a long time, and they're very invested in their own process, and they're comfortable in it and very resistant to change. So I think this is again another constriction that we see coming out of the survey results. We look here at Kim's quote. The thing that really stood out to me is that in order to transition their institutions, they've really got to demonstrate to the financial professionals at the university that the changes that they're implementing put students first, right? So I think if you can articulate to, director of finance within a college or a business administrator within a division of a university, the impact that this will have on students and your ability to deliver your mission, I think they're going to be more open to adopting change, even if it means making themselves a little bit more uncomfortable. And then we can see here from Kristen, really they've got so many people involved in the decision-making process, but there's a huge gap between the sort of financial understanding and acumen of these financial administrators across campuses. And often the existing tools are tailored to kind of that lowest common denominator. So that means that for the high functioning finance professionals, the tools really don't meet their needs. And what we see is this leads to a proliferation of shadow systems and siloed processes, so that from a central level, as you try to aggregate these things up, it becomes very, very difficult. So when we talk through, how do you break through this? Really, you've really got to adopt, and I'll talk about this a little bit later on, not just tools, but also processes. So the tools, that you can put in place to support performance improvement and sort of break the inefficiencies you see in your administrative processes, touch on all 6 of these facets here. So they tend to really reduce your budget cycle so that you can implement and get feedback from end users on where they think they're going to finish the year through a reforecasting process. They also increase accuracy. You don't have this time taken to sort of consolidate Excel worksheets or find missing data. You've got better version control, so you can create different scenarios within the tools to help demonstrate change over time as leadership changes the requirements. You've got improved data integration and security within a lot of these modern tools, and this helps support stronger collaboration. And then the end result that I think a lot of users really want is easier reporting. So, adopting these tools is really critical to breaking this cycle of administrative inefficiency. So I think we're going to, at this point, just ask you to respond to a question. If you can, you've got, looks like about 30 seconds here, but how would you describe your current budget process? Are you guys efficient right now? You've really got this down. Your process is, you think, best in class. It's adequate. Maybe, hey, it's not ideal, but we're improving, we're doing okay, or it's inefficient, and you've really got a way to go to get to a best practice model. So if you guys take some time here, appreciate the feedback. I think it'll take us a few seconds to get the results. And hopefully here we'll have some nice insights into the population that we've got participating here as far as where the budget processes are. So looks like the results are in. We had 33 respondents. 2 of you think you're efficient, so you've got it down. So it's a pretty small percentage there, less than 10%. About half, 17 out of the 33, thought it's adequate. We've got a way to go, and 11 of you thought it's a highly inefficient process. So I think that really bears out what we saw in the survey in terms of where institutions and higher education fall within this sort of paradigm of budget processes. So I'm going to turn it back over to Stuart here, and I think he's going to lead us through a little bit insight into actionable data.
Thanks, Logan. Yeah, so this section of the presentation focuses on data and analytics and some of the challenges that people are facing in that realm. And I think at its most basic, quality data is going to enable institutions to follow that money trail, so really understand where the money is going. And that's definitely a major issue still for colleges and universities. And so this quote from our panelist, Kristen at Community College of Rhode Island, sums it up pretty well. For them, they had to start off by improving their budget system and the process around budgeting so they could roll up the data in a single view that was more effective for them. And then with that as kind of the foundation for them, they had the ability to then really understand where the funds were going and make sense of it and maybe understand whether that made sense for their organization. Unfortunately, though, for most colleges and universities, transparency into financial data is still an ongoing challenge. So this is another one of the questions from the survey, and more than half of the institutions that we surveyed struggled with a whole range of key financial reporting capabilities. Again, they were able to choose more than one here. And the challenges including some of the most basic reporting functions, so pulling data from multiple sources, building dashboards and visualizations, accessing just clean data, ad hoc reporting, ease of report creation. So while improving the budget and planning process is clearly a burning platform for institutions, as Logan was just talking about, building out more modern, sophisticated reporting capabilities is also a major pain point and a major need. And when we discussed this with our panelists, they all basically agreed with that sentiment. And you can see on the left-hand side some of the critical areas for improvement that they pointed out. So then on slide 23, we provided some more commentary from the panelists, which highlight other aspects of the reporting challenges that they're having. So first, from Kim at USC, she makes the connection between accessing data and the ability to plan effectively. And I think her point is really well taken, which is that if you can't get good data or you can't get it out of a system quickly, you're really going to struggle to develop stronger strategic plans, make them on a more timely manner. And at the end of the day, that's the impact on the organization's performance and what's really hindering the ability for organizations to overcome their financial challenges. The second quote from Kristen at CCRI speaks to the need to put reporting tools in the hands of end users. And that's key from really two perspectives in my mind. First, it increases the trust that they have in the data, which is what her point is. But then it also empowers the frontline employees and management to be informed, to be better stewards of their resources, and to really be proactively managing their part of the organization. So I think those 2 points are very powerful in understanding how reporting can impact the organization. The next survey question takes a closer look at a specific analytical tool, which is KPIs. So only half of colleges and universities are currently using financial KPIs. So on the positive side, that was actually slightly better than last year. 44% last year were using them, but it's well below the volume of KPIs being used by institutions for other functions, like enrollment. So 80% of institutions were using enrollment KPIs, and academic data KPIs, which is 73% of institutions were using them. And then you can see here, though, among the ones that were using KPIs, the ones that are most common are revenue and productivity type of KPIs, ones coming from the credit rating agencies, and then administrative cost benchmarking. And then on the topic of KPIs, the next slide has some more comments from our higher ed panelists who had two interesting perspectives. First, Zach Evans from Lane Community Colleges in Oregon indicated that he and his board really find them to be helpful, but then he said that the one impact of using them, which was that he needed to back up his metrics with more supporting data. And I think we can all understand that. Anytime you're going to introduce new data points and you're going to use them to evaluate the performance of other people within the organization, you're definitely going to have to expect that there's going to be increased scrutiny. And that scrutiny is probably healthy for the organization. It's all important that we trust each other and that we trust the numbers that are coming out of the finance office, but it's obviously also adding complexity to the workload for the finance office. The other perspective was from Kim at USC, and she really thought that it was imperative that colleges and universities beginning using KPIs as well as other standard business management approaches to ensure that they're effectively stewarding their resources. And again, I think we can all appreciate that point of view as well. Higher ed needs to begin adopting more of these time-tested business management practices in order to ensure that we're successful and that we're moving in the right financial direction. Then the final survey question here around reporting analytics looks at a more recent trend in data science, which is predictive analytics. And given the challenges that many schools are having with just the basics around reporting capabilities, it's probably not surprising that only about a quarter of institutions are using predictive analytics to support their planning and their finance activities. That said, you can see here that 47% have that as a long-term goal for the institution. And we really think that that's a positive trend given the challenges the industry is facing currently, as well as the rapid evolution and how many companies are using big data and predictive analytics in other industries. So it's really something that's proven to be successful and helpful in many industries, and something that higher ed needs to adopt. And then on the right-hand side, you can see where people are using predictive analytics, where it's beginning to be seen and utilized in higher ed, which are areas like tuition and enrollment projections, as well as some applications within budgeting. So then the final slide here on reporting and analytics provides a few suggestions on how institutions can achieve that analytics breakthrough. So first, I think it's critical that users across the organization have access to data and multiple years of data. So typically with our clients, we're seeing that 3 to 5 years of historical data is required in order for them to really understand the trends that have happened in the past, kind of analyze them and forecast the future performance. And that historical data should really be stored at the lowest level possible, and users are then able to roll it up using different reporting hierarchies. So for example, we're generally recommending to our clients that the users have transactional level data that then can be rolled up to the GL actuals that they're looking at. Or on the student side, the student level data can be rolled up across programs or cohorts or the colleges they're in. So being able to see at the lowest level, but then also see it aggregated up in different views. And then finally, the third point here is integrating the various data sources and the ability to really report on that information in a single view. So you should absolutely be pulling together both financial data alongside student and HR information to understand those interactions between the financial performance of the university and the various operational components within the university. But doing that is going to require generally that you have a data warehouse where you can consolidate all that information together. And then once you get that data warehouse, it's also important that your budgeting and your planning tools are using the same data set, same data warehouse. That way everyone's on the same page for both the historical reporting as well as the future planning. Those are just some ideas to have that breakthrough from a reporting and analytics perspective. So now we're going to move on to another polling question. Here we're going to ask everyone to respond to the question of how satisfied are you with your access to data in support of KPI reporting. So if you could take a second to respond, are you satisfied? You've got all the data you need. You're kind of neutral. It's not ideal, but you're making it work. And then possibly you're dissatisfied would be the third option. We've got 4 more seconds, so please respond if you can. And then we'll take a look at the responses. Poll is closed, and we'll get the results here in just a second. Punching away. And so on this one, it looks like actually dissatisfied. So the majority of people are actually struggling to pull together that KPI information. And again, looking at all the different areas where we see issues with reporting and analytics, that's not surprising to me at all. So 44% dissatisfied, 41% were neutral. And again, only just a handful of 3 people were satisfied with their access to data. Thanks for taking the polling question. And we'll turn it back now to Logan to take us through the problem number 3, which is organizational structure.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. Yeah, I think one of the interesting anecdotes that came out of this year's survey, one of the questions, and then also the feedback we received from our 6 panelists was how important organizational structures are. And I think it kind of came out from 2 sort of areas or 2 parts. One is how is the process managed, and the other is how are the people managed. And this really comes down to the idea of centralization versus decentralization. And so this question here is really focused on your financial process. So, how many universities leverage a centralized process versus decentralized? So, in a centralized process, you have a lot of control as a central, budget office or financial professional. But you don't have a lot of accountability in the organization. So in a decentralized model, which is a little bit more difficult to execute on, you're distributing out the planning to financial professionals within each college or division. but you're also, even though it's a little bit harder to execute on, you're distributing out also accountability. So you're making them more accountable for their actions. So again, because most universities are leveraging this centralized model, users are just notified of their spending authority, and they don't have a lot of discretion over the funding and the spending. They're not active participants. So this is one thing that really stood out in this year's survey results is that, and I think this is also linked to tools, right? If you don't have great tools that allow you to distribute out the process, it's more difficult to execute on a decentralized model. And the next quote here from Garth Perry at the University of Arizona, he's really focused on the organizational structure. So how do financial professionals at higher education institutions, how are they reporting up throughout the organization? We've actually seen this shift at quite a few institutions we work with, where the financial professionals embedded within, the dean's office for each college or the vice president's office for each division, they're actually now reporting centrally to the CFO or vice president of finance and not reporting necessarily directly to the faculty department heads or the deans or the vice presidents. And I think what Garth says here really kind of hits at the heart of that. It's that when those people aren't incentivized to follow sort of the institutional-wide financial goals set by executives, when they're really beholden to the individual deans and vice presidents, that becomes much harder to pivot and to transition and to incorporate change throughout the organization. I think this really gets at the heart of it. He talks about shared governance here and understands that in the context of faculty and academic programs. But finance and business operations, institutions are required to move quicker in the current environment, you really have to evaluate whether those people should be rolled up centrally. On the next question here, it's not enough to really just kind of focus anymore on cost management and on data practices. You also have to look at the university business model. So what we're seeing is a lot of institutions who are incorporating our tools aren't just sort of looking for better insight into their data. They're also sort of using it to drive change. And the most common way we're seeing that is reviewing and diversifying and changing program offerings. But this really requires a planning model that can flex. And again, when you're using an incremental budget model, it makes shifting resources very difficult. And it doesn't always encourage deans and other leadership within the organization to change programs and act really kind of entrepreneurially. So you kind of get stuck with existing programs and differing offerings, and the data isn't there in an incremental model where you're just using last year's budget. It becomes a lot harder to sort of manage that change. So some of the other options you're seeing people look at here is refinancing, looking at different ways of funding the organization. A lot of partnerships. I was actually kind of surprised this is only at 12% because we're seeing a lot of people, a lot of institutions partner with third-party vendors for online course management, and diversifying their operations that way. And so you see some of the other options here that institutions are really looking at. And again, this kind of goes back to I went to the wrong slide there. But Kim's quote here really kind of hits at the heart of that, is that you've got to really shift the non-traditional way that higher education leaders think about their institutions, and you've got to be able to move with the times. So oftentimes the tools that you have sort of act as a barrier to do this. And the other thing is, I talked earlier about culture, but you've got to have the institutional fortitude to kind of promote and manage change. That tends to be really hard within the higher education industry. So kind of the process breakthrough that we want to point out here is that talking through the sort of administrative inefficiency and the data analytics that we've hit on, that's not enough. You can't just take the data, work with the data and the tools. If you're just putting a modern solution, but you're not shifting the way you're organized, the way you operate in your business models, it's just not going to be enough to move the needle within higher education in the current environment we're facing. So you've got to really evaluate that organizational structure to make sure it's going to support the needs as they shift throughout the university. You want to evaluate the span of control, sort of how much how many spans you have across the organization in terms of boots on the ground to the executive leadership. You want to identify which processes and practices should really be centralized versus decentralized. And one of the ways you can really do that is look at your peers. Look at your peer data. It's out there. It's typically pretty easy to get access to. It can provide some insights into improvements you can make at your organization. And so what this slide is really getting at is evaluating administrative redesign. So leading these sort of practice, and on the left side here, we've got centralized on the far left and decentralized on the far right. And really, as you're evaluating these within higher education, there are a few key characteristics. One is you got to make sure these functions are strategically aligned. So they're aligned with the institutional strategy and provide support to enable the achievement of the strategy. You've got to make sure that within the institution, people are partnering. So that requires strong communication, collaboration, and alignment of that institutional strategy in order to drive, enterprise-wide decision support. The other is strong process governance, whether it comes data governance is critical right now. Seeing a lot of people focus on data governance practices, but these processes have to be continuously evaluated and closely managed, including the roles, responsibilities, who's accountable for it, who's providing oversight. And the last is really just optimizing our operating model. So the capabilities and organizational structures should be responsive to, and reflective of leading sort of best practice business processes, which allow us to enable technologies and manage enterprise needs and expectations. So I think the last question we have here really focuses on which of the following is the best next step for improving budgeting, reporting, and financial processes at your institution. So I have additional questions and would like to speak to someone. I'd like to see a demo of Axiom budgeting and reporting, or I'll put today's best practices into action. So really looking at sort of what you learned here today and how you want to put it into action going forward. So if you could provide a quick response, we'd really appreciate it. And the polling has closed, so we will let you know when these results come in.
And thanks to everybody for their participation. I think we'll go on here for one more slide here tell us a little bit more about Axiom. And Stuart's going to tell us a little bit more.
Yeah. Before we open up to Q&A, we just wanted to provide a brief overview of Kaufman Hall and the software solutions that we offer for those of you that might not be familiar with us. So Kaufman Hall has been around for about 30 years, and we provide performance management software as well as in-house consulting services for colleges and universities. And so we developed the Axiom Higher Education Suite to meet really all of the financial planning needs of colleges and universities. You can see on the right-hand side there, the circle depicts the different elements of the system. And each of the blue components there are supported by a unified platform with robust reporting as well as enterprise-grade security that kind of wraps around all of it. So the other unique element of Axiom, in addition to the software solutions that we offer, is our approach to implementation. We do 100% of our implementations in-house with a team that's dedicated to higher ed and staffed with folks that have spent years working in colleges and universities, just like Logan and myself. So that's just a quick overview. If you would like more information, you can ask a question here on the chat, or you can also visit our website at kaufmanhall.com, and we will definitely follow up with you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Stuart and Logan. I really appreciate you both being with us, sharing your time and expertise. I know there was a lot contained in your report there, and you kind of went through the highlights quickly in a short amount of time here. So we appreciate you guys consolidating everything, distilling it down for us. A couple of quick reminders for our audience. If you do have a question, please enter it in the Q&A bottom right-hand corner there. We did get some questions here asking about accessing a copy of the slides. And again, yes, everyone who registered, you'll get a follow-up email with a link to the slides and a link to the archive recording, so you can go back over it if you'd like to at a later time, or if you want to share with anyone on your team at your institution, you'll be able to do that. But for now, if you have any questions, feel free. Now is your chance. Just enter it in the Q&A bottom right-hand corner. I know Stuart and Logan, again, had to kind of go over, fit a lot of content in a short amount of time there. If you have further questions, feel free to enter in the Q&A here. Thanks in advance. We have several good questions here. This one came in early on. Said, did you determine, or did the report look at the breakdown for various budget models? For example, RCM, ABB, centralized, incremental, etc. Did the report touch on any of those? Stuart or Logan, you have any opinion on that?
I don't know that. I think that's a good will be a good data point for us to include in the future. So I appreciate the question, and hopefully something we can bring to bear next time. I will say, just from my experience, the overwhelming majority of budget models are the incremental model. I think it's based on the current tools. It's typically the easiest to implement, but I think more and more we see people shifting to incentive-based budgeting, or sort of that RCM model, and that really drives to the need. A lot of institutions are going to it out of necessity. Maybe they've allowed sort of programs and different faculty to hang around too long, and it's just been too difficult from a political standpoint to implement the changes and the shifts they've needed. So they shift to the incentive-based budget or the RCM model, and that really helps to highlight and drive change. So it's a lot harder to articulate and demonstrate the need for the change when you use an incremental budgeting model, in my opinion. So those that are using different allocation methods for centralized costs and revenue, distributing that out, that can be a difficult process in terms of the change management. You've got to be very transparent, and the data you provide that backs up the methodologies used to distribute out those centralized revenues and expenses. But it can be very valuable, and I think allows universities to be more flexible. And I think some universities are just kind of stepping their toes into that process, where they might be implementing that incentive-based budgeting model to highlight programs or departments that aren't operating efficiently, but then they're still choosing to subvent it. But it at least facilitates a conversation about how they might need to shift resources in the future.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Stuart, I might go to you with this next one, just because it came in while you were talking about data analytics and the availability of data, the importance of that. And someone asked, when you were covering that, what do you see as the major problem for budgeting? Is it poor IT software supporting the school, or is it more poor administrative management ability? Stuart, it seems like you need both of those. There's the technology tools, but there's also the know-how, the management.
Yeah.
Do you think it usually leans more one way or the other?
Honestly, from my hands-on experience doing budgeting in universities, I do think the technology is a major hindrance, and probably the bigger hindrance than the process and just the organizational structure. It's really difficult to get efficient doing a budget with just Excel spreadsheets and to do any meaningful analytics. So I think while people may be apprehensive because of the effort that is entailed in implementing software or in a system, I think the gains that they get are incredible. So that's honestly where I would start. And I think you want to evaluate your process and the people as you make that shift. But I do think you can get major benefits from using modern technology.
I think one trend that kind of brings these two things together that I've seen is that we've successfully incorporated or implemented our software at several institutions, but the institutions where they have kind of an IT or technical resource embedded within the Office of Finance, and they're not having to go out to sort of a shared pool of technical resources and get in a queue every time they've got an ask or they need to integrate with a different source system. We find that those universities who have those embedded resources, are really able to not just sort of manage and adopt the tool, they're really able to extend them on their own because data is the backbone of any of these solutions. And so to the extent you can, I definitely encourage people to, as they're evaluating your resources, think through how you can get some of that technical knowledge within the office. And a lot of people, because of the way universities are structured, you can't just hire a DBA in. So there's, a lot of what we see is a proliferation of this sort of business analyst where it's sort of a blend of that technical and functional knowledge that you need for that role. And then people kind of lean towards the technical side to hire them in.
Okay. Sure. Thank you both. Logan, I might, this one came in while you were talking about, one of the things you mentioned was institutions diversifying their academic offerings and through online learning and things like that, and their financial models. And this is more of a comment, and getting back to what you said previously to the previous question, it says one of the critical issues with or factors with diversifying academic programs and financing is collective bargaining and tenured faculty. Often universities want to diversify, but an abundance of tenured faculty and low enrollment or relevant disciplines complicates the situation. So just kind of a comment there, but I think, Logan, you were just touching on that, right?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, tenured faculty and the collective bargaining are certainly sticking points that a lot of universities run into. Within our tools, you can plan out those collective bargaining agreements and as drivers and highlight which faculty are tenured. But ultimately, to shift that change, it's got to really happen at the executive level, and that's where I think transitioning to a different budget model is really critical if you're seeing that at your institutions, because it's difficult if you don't have the data to support it, right? To make those changes, and those really have to kind of come top down. And in order for that to happen, you've got to have that transparency into the background behind the decisions that people are trying to implement. So agree with, I think, Michael there that those are sticking points, and I think when you think about your processes, those are something that you've got to really evaluate.
Sure. Yeah, common challenge across higher ed. Sometimes the glacial pace of change.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, another question asks, how do you allow for zero-based budgeting, i.e. Listing of each item within a single cost object code? Zero-based budgeting, is that a factor into this report, or do you have a take on that?
Well, within our tool, it's just a configuration to enable zero-based budgeting. So we see a lot of institutions, especially when they're doing their first round within the tool, opting in for zero-based budgeting. So essentially, each department for each object, they've got to justify that for their budget. So they'll see their comparisons for historical actuals and historical budget, but they've got to go in and basically justify each dollar that they're spending. So one thing we do is we've got a calculation method called input detail, which allows you to sort of put in sub-object level detail to help support what you're putting in. So for example, if you just have a generic travel budget and it's a large number, it allows you to put in sort of the detail behind that travel, and that helps support the decision making as your budget's evaluated and goes through the approval process. I hope that answers Karen's question.
Sure. Thank you. Another one asks, how would you characterize your model in terms of centralization versus decentralization?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and Stuart, I don't know if you want to take this, but I mean, I think the model that we implement can support both. I think those that currently, a lot of the institutions implementing our software currently have a centralized model, but they want to transition to a decentralized one. So what we see a lot is when we implement is we're going to set up the model for decentralization. The central office might manage it for the first year to get used to it, to make sure they're experts on it before they distribute the model. But certainly we can handle our solution can handle both. But
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. The other thing I would add is that our system and software like it really helps to support a decentralized model. It allows you to push it out to more people because it's more efficient, and so you can get the benefits of getting their insights and giving transparency to those people without the downside of having your budget take 9 months to create. So
yeah,
that's one of the rationale for systems and for better.
yeah, we've got, and within the system, when you have a more modern software, you can secure the data through roles. You can secure the data through user types, and then allow for a robust workflow to make sure that all the data points are thoroughly reviewed before approving them. So I think that's one of the big advantages.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Another interesting question here says, do you think that getting rid of discount rates would enable schools to better deal with reality and reduce budgeting complexity? Have you seen how removing or dropping discount rates can impact a school? Is that, again, something in the report? We're talking about tuition discounting really causing a lot of complexity in the budget. Is that something you guys have looked at?
It's not exactly our sweet spot, but I think from my perspective, I think schools need to kind of rebase their tuition, and the discount rates are obviously excessive in some cases, but also there needs to be some ability for differential tuition rates depending on who the student is. So there's no easy answer to that one. I don't know, Logan, what you think.
Yeah, this is more an opinion. I mean, I think I haven't seen anyone dropping them in terms of but I understand sort of the background or the impetus of the question. I think it would really take more of a collective effort across institutions. I don't know if anyone's going to have the Jerry Maguire moment of who's coming with me with dropping discount rates, but certainly, something that I think collectively should be evaluated by higher education.
Sure. Seems like a larger issue industry-wide. What are some of the common traits or characteristics you see among these higher ed institutions who follow some of these industry best practices? Higher ed's pretty diverse. We're talking about financial success. Are there key characteristics you see among some of the leaders that, like those you highlighted here, or that follow these best practices?
Yeah, I mean, I think I touched on one based on an earlier question, and that is I see, people who are implementing best practice solutions really own the data and that embedded sort of technical expertise within the Office of Finance. The Office of Finance is really just so reliant on data that I think it's a critical function. The other one is just strong executive sponsorship. When you're talking about the kind of change we've outlined and needed based on our survey results, that's going to require it's going to, just to be straightforward, there's going to be a lot of resistance to that across campus. So getting executive buy-in at the president, sort of executive vice president, provost level is key, so that as you get pushback from deans, vice presidents across the institution, people at the executive level understand why you're going through it and can explain that and kind of act as a barrier for you as you're trying to implement a system that is going to be changed for a lot of people and amongst a population that is often very resistant to that.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the other one I would say is just a commitment to transparency. I've seen change be successful. There was a huge effort to be transparent, to communicate the change, not just once, twice, 3 times, but just over and over again, so everyone is bought in and understands it.
Sure, absolutely. Great. Well, we're just about at the top of the hour here. Stuart and Logan, thank you so much. You've given us a lot to think about here, and we really appreciate you both taking the time to share your expertise with us. Thanks to everyone in our audience as well, and to our sponsor, Kaufman Hall, for their generous support of our webinar here today. To everyone in our audience, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you found this presentation informative and useful to you. Producing events like this one is just part of our mission here at UB to inform college and university leaders like you about the latest news and trends in higher ed management. You'll find more coverage about issues such as the ones we discussed here in the pages of our print magazine, as well as our digital edition and website, and in our daily e-newsletter and other e-newsletters, which you can sign up for right on our website. And as I mentioned before, for those of you who would like to share the content of this webinar with your colleagues, or if you want to go back over it at your own pace, you can access the recording by going to the URL on your screen here, where it will be posted as an archive. And if you'd like to download the slides, if you want to go back over those, you'll find a link to them in that follow-up email that you'll receive later on. So keep an eye out for that. So that is it for today's event. Once again, I'm Kurt Osley-Durley for University Business on behalf of everyone here at UB and our sponsor for today, Kaufman Hall. Goodbye, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much for joining us.